131 in this book right here. So we, just to recap again, we're speaking about evil, so that was very apropos, and how first to acknowledge that it exists in the world, also to acknowledge that it's bad and therefore must be eradicated. You know, we're starting to go back now to the soul, to the three levels of the soul that pertain to this world, which are nefesh, ruach, and neshama, and how each time a person does a mitzvah, we also spoke a lot about this, then one aligns himself and his neshama, his soul, at least those three parts of the soul, with the divine. Okay, let's continue. Let's continue here, the very top of page 131. Does anyone want to read?
I'll read.
Please, Margot, go for it.
As explained in the Zohar, the Torah and the Holy One, blessed be He, are one. The meaning of this is that the Torah, which is the wisdom and will of the Holy One, blessed be He. And then there's a little paragraph here. The Torah is the supernal wisdom of God, Chachma di Atzilut, embodying the totality of the divine relationship with the created reality. The mitzvot of the Torah are the divine will, expressing God's desire as to what should be done and what should not be done. Right.
I remember, we actually touched upon this, and we even mentioned that the first word of the 10 Commandments is Anochi, which is bizarre because it's an Egyptian word, but God used that purposely, as the Zohar points out, that Anochi are the initials of four Aramaic words, Ana nafshi ketaviti avit, I, my soul, wrote and gave you. In other words, the Torah itself is the soul of God. God put his entire self in the Torah. And therefore, when one studies the Torah, he's not just studying a good book. He's not just studying the bestseller of all times, because the Bible is the bestseller of all times, even before cookbooks. Imagine that. But he's also studying, he's also connecting to God, connecting to the divine. And therefore, in Judaism, studying Torah is a mitzvah in and of itself. Now, of course, you have to translate into actions. But even if you don't, you miss the purpose if you don't. But even if you don't, then you still are connecting with God, because it's the divine himself that put himself in the entire Torah. Let's continue. I know we spoke about this notion, and he develops this a little. 131. And the Holy One, blessed be. Continue with those words.
And the Holy One, blessed be He, himself are one, since he is both the knower and the knowledge, as explained above in the name of Maimonides. The Torah is God's Chachma, which is synonymous with the divine being himself. As explained in chapter 2, God's knowledge is his knowledge of himself. So all three, the object of his knowledge, the knowledge of it that he has, and he, the knower, are one and the same. Therefore, the person who studies Torah, fusing his own mind to its concepts, achieves a bond with the divine and thereby with God himself.
Right.
You just said that.
Right. So let's continue.
Okay. An examination of what the author writes in chapter 2 raises the question. Here we say that the Torah and the mitzvot are loftier than the soul because they derive from the divine Chokmah. Yet in chapter 2, we said that the soul is a part of God above, literally, for the very reason that it derives from the divine Chokmah. So in what way is the Torah superior to the soul?
Right. They both come from God, and they both come from the Chokmah, the wisdom of God. So good question. So let's hear his answer, and then I want to develop this idea. Go ahead, Margot. One
explanation is that in chapter 2, the author speaks of the soul's essence, whereas he speaks of the soul's 10 attributes discussed in chapter 3. In other words, although the essence of the soul derives from the divine Chokmah, the soul's attributes are on a lower level. See our introduction in chapter 3. Its garments, which consist of the Torah and its mitzvot, derive directly from the divine Chokmah. Thus, the relationship between the soul's attributes and their garments is such that while the garments are intrinsic to the attributes, they constitute in and of themselves a loftier manifestation of the divine.
Right. So this is a deep Kabbalistic discussion, but it's actually one that's rooted also in the Talmud. The Talmud asks the question of what was created first. And because we know that God, there are a few things that God created. The Torah is one of them. The world is another one. The souls are another one. Other entities that God created. So what came first? Now, what the Torah is really asking is what is holier? Is that the souls come before the creation of the Torah, or the Torah come before the creation of the soul? Everyone agrees that the world came last. And it's a discussion. And Talmud states that, and you can interpret this the way you want, but Alpaim Shana Kadma Torah La'olam, 2,000 years before the world was created, the Torah was created. So the Torah was created way before the world, 2,000 years before the world. But the Talmud also says that the souls were created even before the Torah. Now, what again, this is saying, it's rooted in this discussion right here of the Tanya, that the souls in a way are holier than the Torah itself. But how could that be? Because we spoke about the souls coming from the Chokhmah of God, the wisdom of God, and the Torah also comes from the Chokhmah of God. So they're on the same level. One can't be holier than the other. And the answer is, he says here, again, it's a deep Kabbalistic concept, but I'm going to bring it down a little bit, try to at least, and that is that the soul's attributes were created from the wisdom of God, same as the Torah itself. But the essence of the soul, that is way above the wisdom of God. It's almost like a child towards his parent. The connection of the child to his parent, or the parent to his child, is way above wisdom. It's way above anything wisdom can really understand, can contain. Something that's very essential. Same here, the souls were created in a way from the essence of God, or as the Zohar says, mahutu atzmutu ma'ut, the essence and the quintessence, maybe that's a better translation, quintessence of God. The attributes, how a person manifests himself in this world, even in the divine way, that comes from the wisdom of God. That's already the next step, the step of development. That can be fathomed, can be contained in wisdom. And those attributes, therefore, come also from the same level as the Torah. So that's the answer that it gives. Practically, what does this mean? I think it means a few things. Number one, it means that we can study Torah. Because say we are on the same level of the Torah, or we in a way are maybe even a lower level of the Torah, then the Torah is not something we could ever encompass in our minds. At the end of the day, if we're lower than the Torah, we can't understand it. If E.T., right, from extraterrestrial planet comes and says, phone home, remember that movie? Mm-hmm. So who says he's speaking about the phone? Maybe I don't have the capacity, the mental capacity to even understand what a phone is. So if I'm lower than the Torah, I won't have the mental capacity to understand the Torah. Maybe it's already a useless act. But here God is telling us, no, you're at least on the same level, if not higher. So your connection to the Torah is very much there, and therefore you ought to connect to it and develop it. That's number one. But number two, I think on a deeper level, what this is saying, and it's something quite amazing, and that is that God will pick the Jewish people over the Torah any day, anytime, to the point that when the Torah itself was in danger of being extinct, so to speak, God had to pick the Jewish people over it. What incident am I referring to? Referring to the golden calf. Do you remember that sin in the Torah where the Jewish people, just 40 days after they received the Torah, Mount Sinai, after they were exposed to maybe the most divine revelation in Jewish history, couldn't take Moses' tardiness. And, he was staying up there on the mountain, and they decided to build a golden calf. And then Moses came down the mountain by the instruction of God. God told him, Lech red, go down to the mountain. Your children have sinned. And he goes down and he sees them sinning with the golden calf, worshiping this calf, even though they had pledged their adherence to God just 40 days before that. And we know the story. Moses breaks the tablets, and then Moses goes up to ask for forgiveness. What happens during that conversation with God when he asks for forgiveness? God says, well, I want to erase this people. They've betrayed me. And Moses says, well, you either erase me or erase me from your books and accept these people, or yeah, I mean, you either accept these people, or you erase me from your books. In other words, what God erased me and your books. What God was really, what Moses was telling God, look, God, I want to remind you of your connection with the Jewish people. It's higher than the Torah. And because it's higher than the Torah, you can't pick one over the other. If they were on the same level, then you could pick one over the other. But you have no choice. You're stuck with these people. If you think that you can just erase them and keep the Torah, well, you're wrong. I remind you, God, that the way you created the souls and the way you created the Torah should tell you right there and then that the Jewish people come first. And Moses, when he reminded that to the Jewish, to God himself, hey, the Jewish people come first. You can't just erase them and keep the Torah. God said, in a way, you're right. I want to erase them. And he forgives them. Because again, Moses there reminded him of that essential connection. So when God forbid, is told to choose between the Torah and the Jewish people, he has to choose the Jewish people because we are on a high level. Now, practically speaking, and I think that's why I find it, although it's so esoteric, I find it so beautiful. Practically speaking, and it ties back to what Ronnie was saying before. If we see a person that lives his life so against the Torah, we might say, oh, this person doesn't represent anything that's soulful, anything that's divine. Let me cross him or her out. And yet God reminds us that no, his divinity is not dependent on him keeping the Torah. It's not dependent on him keeping a word of the Torah. His divinity is way above his connection to the Torah. It essentially comes from the deepest part of God, from the innermost part of God. And therefore, how dare we cross him out? Because we shouldn't like him based on his relationship with the Torah. We should like him based on a relationship with God that is way above his relationship with the Torah. And that's how practical we can really translate this teaching into.
What does it really mean? What does it really mean that Hashem made the Torah before creation or at the time of creation? We're not talking of the 5 books of Moses when you talk about Torah, because otherwise then it's all preordained.
So that's a good question. That's an excellent question.
What does it really mean, the Torah?
So there's a whole discussion about this, and Maimonides says one thing. When Nachmanides says one thing, some say yes, it is the 5 books of Moses. And God, yes, God preordained everything. God does not belong in the present. He belongs in the past, present, and future together. The name of God, Yud, Hey, Vav, and Hey, encompasses the 3 tenses, the 3 Hebrew words for the 3 tenses, Haya, Hoveh, Vehiyeh, which means past, present, and future, because God knew the future just as he knows the past at the same time. And that's not something I think the human mind can fathom, but therefore, it's logical to say that God wrote about the future because he is the future, as is the past. So it could very well be the 5 books of Moses. Some of the opinion that no, it's not the stories that evolved in the future, but it's the commandments that were always there. So, and then when you take out the stories that happened in the future and you left with just the commandments, then it maybe makes sense. So it's a good question you ask, and I don't know if there's a definitive answer to that, but it's certainly a part of the Torah, if not the entire Torah. And that was created before the world. Again, to represent that it is higher than the world. It's not confined to the limits of the world. Yeah. But again, just as the Torah is not confined to the limits of the world, so are we not confined to the limits of the world. We're above the limits of the world, even above the limits of the Torah itself. It's something that's really astounding if you think about this. That's why, in a way, we were able to break the nature of this world in miraculous ways. That's why we believe in miracles, because we come from a place that's above nature. Above nature means not confined to nature, and therefore we can create miracles and break nature. That doesn't always happen, but it happens. I was just studying the Talmud yesterday, and there's a beautiful story I re-encountered of Nakdimon ben Gurion. who was, maybe that's where David Ben Gurion got his name from. I don't know. But I know he did change his last name to Ben Gurion.
His name was David Green.
Sorry?
His name was David Green.
Yeah, right. And he changed Green to Ben Gurion. I don't know. Maybe he was inspired by the story. But there's a story about Nakdimon Ben Gurion, who was one of the wealthiest Jews in Jerusalem in the times of the Jerusalem temple. And when the Jews came for a pilgrimage one year, during one of the three festivals, Sukkot, Passover, or Shavuot, doesn't say which one, then there was a drought in the land and there was not enough water for all of the pilgrims. So Nakdimon Ben Gurion went to a wealthy non-Jew who he knew from business, I guess, and he said to him, please lend me 12 wells of water so that we can have enough water for all the pilgrims, and I'll return those 12 wells of water by this and this date. And if I don't return 12 wells of water because the drought had continued, then I promise you I will give you 12 talents of silver, which was worth so much more. Fine. He provides those, he lends him those wells of water. He provides the water for the pilgrims. It's an amazing story. And the time comes where he has to return the 12 wells of water, and there was no rain. The 30th day comes, he gets a message from this guy who lent him the 12 wells of water. He says, hey, prepare to return either the 12 wells of water, but you probably won't be able to. So prepare to give me those 12 talents of silver that you promised. Nakdimon Ben Gurion says, 1 second, the day isn't over yet.
Yeah.
So give me a few more hours. Says, fine. Noon comes, sends him the same message. You still haven't returned the 12 wells of water, prepare to return them, or you have to give me 12 talents of silver. It's now almost sunset. He sends him one last message as he's going to the bathhouse. I guess they would go to the bathhouse in the afternoon. And it says that this man walked into the bathhouse all happy because he knew he was getting 12 talents of silver. And Nakdimon Ben Gurion instead walked into the temple all sad because he didn't know what to do. As he walks into the temple, he says to God, Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the universe, you know very well, I didn't borrow these 12 wells of water for me. I borrowed them for your people, for them to have water during your festival. So do something about this. As soon as he said that, clouds covered the sky and it began to pour.
Yeah.
After a while, he had 12 wells of water. The guy's coming out of the bathhouse. He's coming out of the temple with his prayer answered, and he runs to give him the 12 wells of water. It's not over. Man says to him, well, you know, I could still charge you for the 12 talents of silver because it's nighttime. And the day is over. And you said by the 30th day or whatever it is, by this and this day. And it's... So Nakdimon says, you know what? You're right. He goes back to the temple. Listen to the story. He goes back to the temple and he says to God again, Ribono Shel Olam, you know I didn't do this for you, for me. I did this for you and for your people. All of a sudden, God changed the laws of nature and the sun came out again.
Yeah.
And then he went back to this man and he said, this day isn't over. I don't owe you anything. So yeah, you 12 wells of water, leave me alone.
That's it.
And now the Talmud says that the guy's name, this wealthy Jew's name, was really Buni. But they called him Nakdimon because Nakdimon means sun. And that's because the sun came out for him.
Oh.
Now, why am I telling you the story? Because you see, we can create miracles. How can we create miracles? If we were of this world, it's impossible. We have to abide to the nature, to the limits of this world, to the laws of nature. But we're not of this world. We come from way above the Torah itself even. So the world can sometimes, in very specific cases, can adjust itself to us and break its own laws. And that's where really the Kabbalistic notion that you know, miracles, the whole notion of miracle comes from.
I saw it happen Tuesday.
Really?
Medically speaking, woman who was very, very sick, I mean, on the verge of death, that there was no choice but to emergently deliver her baby, had a complete cardiac arrest on the operating room table just as beginning the C-section. They start CPR. This woman is 300 pounds, diabetic, hypertensive, multiple other medical problems, 42 years old.
Yeah.
And somehow we got the baby out. Did not expect her to survive. As soon as the baby came out, within a minute and a half or so, baby starts crying. We're closing everything up. And suddenly we hear from the anesthesia team that they got a pulse back.
Wow.
And off to the intensive care unit. And on Friday, I go in there to visit her, and with the ventilator still going, she gives me a double thumbs up.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean,
Wow.
it defies anything. And of course, you know, standing there in the midst of, you know, doing all this, you know, surgery, you're praying obviously for a miracle, because, you know, just looking at the physiology, I mean, the resuscitation shouldn't be successful in a case like this.
Right.
So I've seen it, you know.
Wow. Wow. Yeah.
Defying nature. Yeah.
Yeah, more than we do, that's for sure. I mean, even though I will say, I mean, then it's an incredible story, Jordan. Thank you for sharing. But I will say that there's two types of miracles, right? And in Hebrew, even there are two words for miracle. There's the word nes, and there's the word pele, which means wonder. Now, what we're speaking about is maybe pele, wonder, because creates wonder. Wow. But there's a miracle that's called nes, and that's the miracles that we actually are privileged to see all the time. The fact that we are here, thank God, healthy, studying together, breathing, is a miracle in and of itself. And as unfortunately, those are the miracles that we don't always pay attention to. But that I would dare suggest that that's also above the laws of nature. Sometimes that, you know, at the end, nature is nature. And God, thank God, continues to create the world constantly. But then the fact that he himself is involved in this constant creation is in of itself a miracle. So that's the nes. So we're wowed by pele, by plaot, by the wonders. And we're not so wowed by the nisim, by the nes. But the nes also should really move us just as deeply. You know, I think that it's interesting also because Thanksgiving is coming up, maybe to connect it to this. And I was thinking about this because we say thank you, but very often, and it's a pity, very often, I mean, that's the society we live in. But we teach our children, for example, to say thank you when people give them gifts, when people from the outside give them something that's unexpected, or maybe that is expected. But the act of thanksgiving is an act that is always geared towards that which we receive from the outside. How about shifting the act of thanksgiving from an act that is executed towards the outside to an act that is executed towards the inside, towards that which we already possess, towards that which we already have? How often do we teach our children, well, say thank you for breathing this morning. Say thank you for the food that you have on the table. Say thank you for even having, thank God, a healthy life. How often do we say that? No, it's thank you when you receive this, when you receive that. But how about the thank you for what you already possess? We don't often teach that. And in a way, you know, that's what nisim really mean. That's saying thank you for that which we already have. I think that's the beauty of the prayer of Modani. In the morning, we say Modani as soon as we wake up in the morning. For what? For the soul that God has restored within us. For that which we have right here.
Every morning, my 97-year-old father walks to his front door. This is the truth. He opens the door and he says, thank you, Hashem, for giving me another day, for breathing, for being here. And he said he can get on with his day after that.
Right, that's beautiful.
He does it every day.
Beautiful, beautiful, very beautiful. Yeah. Anyhow, yeah. All right. So let's just continue, unless, I mean, of course, please, any other comments, questions?
I think with age, you begin to appreciate more the ordinary as extraordinary.
Oh, sure.
I don't know if it's just, that aspect of aging, or you start to have another dimension of how you look at certain things. But, even this morning, the sunrise was incredible. And, yeah, the sun's supposed to come up every morning, but, does it have to?
No, it's true.
That's true.
It's very true. Yeah.
If
I
you were in
wonder
Toronto,
sometimes-
you wouldn't have the sunshine because it's snowing today. And I'm very happy. We just got into Arizona a couple of days ago.
Oh, okay, good. Welcome back, William. Great to have you back.
Beautiful.
Very
Huh.
nice. Good.
They're going on total lockdown in Toronto for 28 days now.
No way.
Oh, man.
Oh,
We
wow.
got out in time.
Oh, good. Good.
Hmm.
Yeah. But I will say, I think, Jordan, what you said is very true. It reminds me of the experiment, the experiment of the frog in the opposite way, where they took a frog and put it in a pot and then put that pot on the stove. And they I think it was in water maybe. And at first it was in cool water, and they slowly but surely put the flames on. And the water started to slowly but surely boil, right? You all know that experiment. And the frog didn't feel it because it was boiling very, very slowly, and eventually it died. Now didn't jump out. It just died. It got used to the warm water that became a little warmer, a little bit warmer, until it didn't realize that it was actually burning to death. And then they took a frog and they put it directly into boiling water. And the frog, of course, immediately jumped out. And the point of the experiment was to say that sometimes, we get used to our environment and we don't pay attention to the surroundings. The change, we're so comfortable in our comfort zone that we don't jump out when we need to jump out. But if we were to be, in a different environment and enter this new environment that we're in from the outside, we would realize, gosh, this is terrible, let me jump out. So it's true for negative environments, but it's true for positive environments too. Sometimes we're so used to, like you said, having the sun rising in the morning that doesn't make us jump of wonderment, of wow, thank you, God. And that's because, again, we live in this boiling water that's comfortable now. It's become comfortable over the years.
Rabbi,
But,
did you notice the on where you see me, there's a light that's kind of behind my head?
yeah.
That was the sun coming through as you were talking.
Oh, wow, beautiful. Or maybe it's just your personal light.
No, it was.
I'll never know.
I can see it out there, and it just went on the wall as you're talking. I couldn't believe it.
Beautiful.
Beautiful, very good. But it's true. I often wonder, just out of it's an intellectual exercise that will never happen. But I wonder, and I ask my children this question often. I wonder, what if God would have created us not at the age of 0, but at the age of 30? Like most animals, by the way. Most animals are born almost fully developed. Only the human beings are born so underdeveloped. What if we were born at the age of 20, 30? Would we then relate to life and to the world differently? Maybe with a greater sense of thank you, of gratitude, and of wonderment? It's a question to ask, but it's certainly a question that could emphasize this point that we're speaking about, that there are miracles above nature, and we deserve to have them because, again, we come from above nature too. We're not confined to the laws, but there's also miracles within nature that also come from above nature. And those are the miracles that we ought to open our eyes to much more.